Hello, today we're going to learn a little bit more about quadratic functions. We're going to graph this function here. First we're going to need to find the equation of the axis of symmetry and the coordinates of the vertex. Then we're going to graph it. Before we get to that, I just want to remind you of the standard form of a quadratic equation, which we talked about briefly yesterday, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. All the graphs that we dealt with yesterday were in the form y equals ax squared. There was no b value. Sometimes there was a c value. So let's go to the graphing calculator real quick. Remember the parent function was just y equals x squared, and we graph it. It looks like this. Now if we add a c value, which is the value that does not have a variable attached to it, all that does is move the graph up in this case, or down depending on if we're subtracting or adding. So the green one moved up because we added 3, the blue one moved down because we added 4. So the c value, all it does is adjust the graph vertically. What happens though when we add a b value? That changes the graph quite a bit. So we're going to do that now. So we have x squared plus, say, 2x. There's the b value, is 2 in that case. And we'll say plus, let's start with 3. Okay, so we're going to graph that. You might not be able to see that very well because it's in yellow. So let me get rid of all these here. Alright, let's put it up here. So x squared plus 2x plus 3. Graph. Okay, so it's showing up in red. As you can see, not only is it adjusted vertically, it's also moved horizontally now. And it hasn't moved vertically just by 3 because that would put the vertex at 3. It's also slid over to the left. And so what we need to figure out before we start graphing is where this axis of symmetry is located before we start graphing points. Because let's say we had, some big graph. Let's try plus 6x plus 6 or something. If we went to graph this, it's kind of way out of the way. So if we started graphing points like -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, we're only catching the right side of this graph here, and we're not going to see where the vertex is, and we're not going to know where the axis of symmetry is. And so we need a way to figure out where the axis of symmetry is before we start to graph. So that's what we're going to learn today. So here's our original equation. Y equals -3x squared plus 12x plus 1. And some smart person figured out that the axis of symmetry will be located, or the x value will be located using this formula. So we take the negative value of b, so b in this case is 12, so we use -12, and divide that by 2 times the a value. So 2 times -3 in this case. And so we get -12 divided by -6 equals 2. So now we know that the x value of the axis of symmetry is 2. Okay, and the axis of symmetry is always a vertical line, so I know that x equals 2 is going to be my axis of symmetry. Let me shrink this, move it off to the side here. Alright, so I'm going to shrink that, move it off to the side, make room for our graph. And so now I know that we need x equals 2 is the axis of symmetry. I'm also going to make my xy chart just like I did in the past. And instead of having 0 as my middle number, I'm going to use 2 as my middle number. So I'm going to use 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so when we plug in 0, we get 0 plus 1 equals 1. When we plug in 1, we're going to get negative 3 plus 12. So far we're at 9. Plus 1 is 10. And if we plug in 2, we're going to get 2 squared, which is 4, times negative 3, which is negative 12, plus 24. So we're at positive 12 plus 1 is 13. And notice what happens when we plug in 3. We're going to get 9, so we get negative 27 plus 36. So we're up to 9 plus 1 is 10. Because remember, now our middle value is right here. And so 1 and 3 are going to be the same, and 0 and 4 are going to be the same. So 4 is going to be 1, but we can double check it here. So 16 times negative 3 is 48 plus 48. So negative 48 plus 1. Okay, so now we have that, and now we can graph it. It's nice to do my t-chart first before I make my xy coordinate grid, because I know that I'm not using any negative numbers in this case, so I can change my graph to reflect that. Alright, so here's my grid. Whoops, where'd it go? There we go. Alright, here's my grid. Make my XY axes. And again, I'm not using any negative numbers, so I'm just going to make my X axis down here. So we got X, we got Y. Make some labels here. I'll spread it out. I'll just label 3. Alright, so now 0, 1 is going to be right here. 110, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is here. 213, there's 2, 11, 12, 13, and then back down. So 3, 10, 4, here we go. So our axis of symmetry of x equals 2 is this vertical line here at x equals 2. And so I can just write x equals 2. The coordinates of the vertex are always that xy coordinate pair where the axis of symmetry is. So the vertex, which is right there, is at 2, 13, and then from there we just make our graph. That's pretty nice. I didn't quite hit it on that side, but you get the idea. Alright, so we'll try it one more time. So here we go. Remember, f of x is just a fancy way of writing y, so we're going to say y equals x squared minus 8x minus 7. Alright, so to graph this, first we're going to have to find out the coordinates of the vertex and the axis of symmetry. So remember, that's always at x equals negative b over 2a. Don't just think of it as negative b over 2a. You got to remember that x, because that's important. Okay, so negative b. So if b is negative 8, the opposite of that would be 8. And then 2 times a, which is 1 in this case. So we have 8 over 2, which is 4. Again, let me shrink that down. Alright, there we go. So we have x equals 4. And so when I make my xy chart, I want to use values near 4. So 4 is going to be my middle number. So I'm going to say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we expect 2 to go with 6 and 3 to go with 5. So if I plug in 2 here, I get 2 squared, which is 4, minus 16. So we're at negative 12. Minus 7 is negative 19. Okay, so that's pretty small there. It's pretty low. Now if we plug in 3, we're going to get 9 minus 24. So we're at what? Negative 15. Minus 7 is negative 22. If we plug in 4, we're going to get 16 minus 32, which is negative 16, minus 7 is negative 23. And then we should be getting negative 22, but let's just double check. We'll check one time. So 5 times 5 is 25, minus 40 is negative 15, minus 7 is negative 22. So there we go. So now we know that this is in fact the middle right here. And so we can graph. We're using very low negative numbers here. So when I pull my grid out, I need to reflect that. I'm actually going to go by 2's in this case because these numbers are so far away from 0. So I'm going to make my x-axis way up here. Y-axis, there we go. X, Y, let's get rid of that. Okay. So if we're going by 2's, this is going to end up being 4. This will be 4. So let's use green here. So 2 negative 19 is going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19 right in the middle. And we have 3 negative 22, so it's in the middle of these. And if that was 19, 20, 22. So that's going to be about there. 4 negative 23, so that's halfway. And then we're going to come back up because we have an axis of symmetry. So remember, the axis of symmetry is that vertical mirror line. We use a dotted line because it's not actually part of the graph. It's just this imaginary invisible line that we use to show that there's a mirror image coming up on both sides. So the vertex in this case was 4 negative 23. So I can put that near the vertex. Got the axis of symmetry, and since it's a vertical line, the equation is always going to be x equals, okay? In this case, x equals 4, and that's it. And then let's finish the graph. So just connect the dots here. Oops. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just try to connect the dots with a curve. Obviously, we know this is not a straight line like a absolute value, but you get the idea. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.